I always stopped at the same gas station. It was my go-to spot, clean, cheap, and close to home. Their gas was always a few cents cheaper than anywhere else, and the guys who worked there seemed friendly enough. But there was one thing that never made sense to me. Why did my tank always take more gas than it should? Every single time, the numbers on the pump just kept going higher, even when I knew for a fact I wasn't that low on fuel. At first, I thought maybe my gauge was off. Or maybe I was just bad at estimating how much gas I needed. But the more I filled up, the more it bugged me. So one day I decided to find out what was really going on. That morning I left work early. The sky was overcast and the air smelled like rain, the kind of weather that makes everything feel a little heavier than it should. I drove straight to the station and parked by pump number 3, the one I always used. The same guy was there behind the counter, short, with a beard that looked permanently stained by engine oil. He gave me the usual nod, not realizing I was about to ruin his day. Before I even turned off the engine, I pulled out my phone and started recording. I wanted proof. My car had exactly a quarter tank left. That meant it should take no more than 10 gallons to fill up completely. I checked the manual twice that morning just to be sure. I swiped my card, selected regular, and started pumping. At first, everything seemed normal. The numbers on the display rolled smoothly. But when the pump hit 10 gallons, something felt off. It didn't click. It didn't stop. The flow kept going, 11, 12, 13, and I could hear the sound of the gas sloshing inside the tank like it was full already. My gut twisted. I knew something was wrong. So I stopped it manually at 14 gallons and looked at the display. It said $54.36. Way too high for a car that barely burns half a tank on my daily route. I took my receipt and went inside. "Hey man," I said calmly, setting the slip on the counter. "Can you check your pump calibration? I think there's an issue with number 3. The clerk barely looked at me. "Nah, they're fine. We had inspection last month." He said it like a rehearsed line, the kind of lie you tell because you've told it 1,000 times. "I don't think so," I said. "My tank can only hold 15 gallons max and I stopped at 14. I shouldn't even be close to empty." He gave me that half laugh, half smirk that people use when they think you're too stupid to argue with. "You probably just ran it lower than you thought," he said, sliding the receipt back to me. I stared at him for a second, then smiled. "Maybe you're right," I said. But in my head I was already planning my next move. The next day I came back. Only this time I didn't come to fill my tank. I came with a measuring canister I'd borrowed from a friend who worked in construction. It was certified to the milliliter, exactly 5 gallons. I parked my car at the same pump, hit record on my phone again and started pumping directly into the canister. As soon as the pump screen showed 5 gallons, I stopped and looked inside the can. It was barely 3. I looked up at the camera on the corner of the building, the one that probably didn't even work, and felt my pulse rise. They were scamming people. Every single customer that pulled up, every tired worker, every mom filling her minivan, they were getting ripped off a few bucks at a time. But with hundreds of cars every day, that few bucks turned into thousands. And that's when the anger really hit me. I wasn't going to yell at the clerk again. I wasn't going to argue with someone who probably didn't even care. I wanted the owner. So I asked around. Turns out, the station was part of a small local chain, owned by a guy named Rick Collins, ex-mechanic, mid-40s, always dressed in business suits now. Apparently he bragged about how stupid people can be when it comes to cars and gas. That night I couldn't sleep. My phone kept lighting up with the video I'd recorded. I replayed it over and over, watching the numbers tick up while the gas level stayed low. It was clear, undeniable proof. So I uploaded it. Title: I caught my local gas station scamming everyone. Within hours it started spreading. By morning it had over 50,000 views. And then I got a call. "Is this you?" The voice was deep, impatient. "Yeah," I said. "This is Rick Collins. You think you can ruin my business with a stupid video?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted him to hear the silence, the calm before the storm. "I don't need to ruin your business," I said. "You did that yourself." He hung up. 2 hours later, when I passed by the station on my way to work, there were inspectors there, yellow jackets, clipboards, the works. Someone had tipped them off. Maybe one of the viewers. Maybe even a former employee. But I wasn't done yet. Because the video wasn't just viral, it was personal. People from the same town started commenting, sharing similar stories, posting their receipts. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about everyone he'd stolen from. So I decided, I'm not just exposing him. I'm going to make sure he never does it again. When the inspectors showed up that morning, they didn't come quietly. 2 vans, badges, clipboards, the kind of official presence that makes people stop mid-sip and pretend they weren't looking at their phones. I didn't hang around the lot to watch them check hoses and stickers. I had something else to do. The first 24 hours after the video went up were chaos. Comments, DMs, strangers telling me the exact same story. They shorted me 2 gallons last month. My elderly neighbor thought she was losing her mind. Receipts. Screenshots. Angry little threads that all led back to pump number 3. I started collecting them like evidence in a case. Every screenshot. Every photo of a receipt that didn't match the real volume. A woman sent me a shaky clip of her 5-year-old grandson crying because they'd run out of gas on the interstate after filling up. Another guy sent me a photo of a tank full of gas with a pump display showing 8 gallons more than he actually got. You don't need millions of dollars to create pressure. You need numbers, witnesses, and noise. The noise spreads, reporters sniff it out, and then the system has to respond, because no one wants their name in the paper next to the word scam. I spent the next 2 days like a man with a mission. I built a folder, labeled it Collins Station, and filled it with things that would make a local newspaper sit up. My footage, the canister test, receipts from at least a dozen people, a short list of former employees who said they'd seen weird calibrations before. I wrote a clear, concise letter to the county weights and measures office and included time-stamped links to my video. I emailed the local TV station with a subject line that didn't lie. Gas station allegedly shortchanging customers, proof attached. Then I did something small and surgical. I called the neighborhood Facebook group. I explained calmly, posted the video, asked people to post their receipts if they'd been shorted. By evening the thread had dozens of comments and a map of the worst times and pumps to avoid. People started organizing. We'll meet Saturday at 10 a.m. and we'll bring our receipts. The next day more than 60 people showed up. This is the part that changes things. 1 angry voice can be ignored. 60 angry voices become a story. 60 voices with receipts become a legitimate consumer movement. The morning the group gathered, I stood on the sidewalk with my phone in my hand while people filtered in. Moms, construction workers, retired teachers. We were 100 strong within an hour. Someone brought a speaker. Someone brought signs. We weren't violent. We weren't carrying anything heavy. We were carrying proof and patience. A reporter from the local paper showed up around 10:30, scribbling and recording, and when she asked to interview me, I told her the truth in plain sentences. How I'd recorded the pump, how I'd tested the canister, how the receipts matched a pattern. She listened and then asked the obvious question, why do you think they get away with it? Because it's small enough to ignore and big enough to pay off someone's lifestyle, I told her. $1 here, $2 there, over thousands of customers, it's revenue. And they rely on people being tired, distracted, or embarrassed to make a fuss. By noon the TV crew had enough for a 3-minute piece. Me explaining the test, footage of the canister, interviews with 5 different customers. The station ran it that night at 6. The headline was merciless. Local station accused of shortchanging customers. The anchor said the words like they were a blade. You could feel the mood shift in town the next morning. People I hadn't met before stopped to thank me in the supermarket aisle. Someone left a note on my windshield, "Thank you for doing this." A small business owner 2 blocks from the station said his regulars preferred to go elsewhere now. The owner of a tow truck outfit called me and offered to post our flyer in his cab. And then the owner, Rick Collins, called me. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He spoke like a man who believed his money and reputation would shield him. "Listen," he said, too calm to be honest. "You're making a fuss over nothing. You post one video and these people," he paused, "they make a mob. Take it down. I'll refund anyone who complains. I'll replace the pump if it's wrong. We'll fix this quietly." I laughed. Laughing at the man didn't feel like victory. It felt like clarifying the stakes. Fix it quietly so you can keep scamming? No thanks. I told the reporter I'd hand everything over to the county. I want an independent review. There was a long silence. "You'll regret this," he said finally. "Threats are never pretty. But they're predictable. They mean you've put your finger in a place that matters." The county did what they were supposed to do. They scheduled an official test of the station's pumps. They sent 2 inspectors with branded vests and a man from the state's Consumer Protection Bureau. They asked me to be there. I was. The test was clinical and slow. They used certified test measures, they ran the pump, they recorded the outcome, they signed forms. Pump number 3 failed spectacularly. The pump oversold fuel by nearly 20%. That's not a rounding error, that's theft by design. When the inspectors pulled the red tag and took the pump offline, The owner's face went from business as usual to a man who'd just been told his house was burning. He tried to argue. He tried to charm. He threatened lawsuits. The inspectors did what inspectors do. They took pictures, they wrote reports, and they ordered the station to stop selling until further calibration. The tag on pump 3 read, "Out of service, do not use." You'd think the owner would fold then, pay fines, replace the pump, and profess contrition. But money can buy a lot, and he had more than most. Collins hired a lawyer, a PR guy, and a security team that suddenly seemed far too attentive to the cars lingering on his lot. That afternoon a car pulled up outside my house. A sedan with tinted windows idled too long. I looked out the blinds and watched it leave. 2 days later my social accounts were getting weird DMs. Accusatory, probing, the type that feel like a person reading your life through glass. "Why stir trouble?" they said. "You making enemies?" they said. I reported the messages and saved them. The pattern of intimidation had begun. It's what happens when someone who's used to getting away with things feels cornered. But for every quiet intimidation, there was a louder counter-response. The county inspector's report was public. The news story had citations. Social media had receipts. A local consumer rights group offered to help people file complaints. A small claims lawyer connected to the group offered free consultations for anyone who wanted to sue for damages, and enough people signed up that it would be more than a nuisance to Collins. Still, something gnawed at me. Exposing the pump and getting it tagged out was satisfying, but the real power was the network. The people who had shared stories, who showed up with their receipts, who refused to be shamed into silence. I started thinking bigger. What if this became a model? What if every station that cheated customers faced the same pressure? But first things first. Collins was not going to go quietly. He had resources and pride and enemies in small places. The question was how far he'd go to silence the sound I'd started. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and went over the plan again. We had the evidence, the inspectors, the news cycle. We had the people. Part of me wanted to rest, let the county do their job and move on. But the other part, the part that had been under the surface since the day he smiled at my receipt, wanted to make sure this didn't just become a temporary headline. So I wrote a short message to the Facebook group. Next steps. Meet at City Hall on Monday. Bring receipts. We're filing a petition. I hit send and felt the familiar electric pull that had started this whole thing, that mix of fear and purpose that comes right before something irreversible happens. I didn't know yet how much it would cost me personally. I didn't know how ugly it could get. But I knew one thing clearly, he'd started this and I was going to finish it. Not with violence. Not with sabotage. With evidence, people, and the kind of relentless attention that makes even the well-insulated squirm. The pump sat silent when I drove by that night. The red tag fluttered in the wind like a challenge. Rick Collins watched from the window of his office, shoulders tight, and I thought I saw, for a second, the man he'd been before the suits and the scams, a mechanic turning a wrench on honesty maybe. But that thought quickly faded. He wasn't going back to being a mechanic. He was trying to be untouchable. And that was the problem I'd volunteered to solve. By Monday morning the petition had 300 signatures. By Wednesday it had 500. People who had never spoken up in their lives were printing copies of receipts, circling pump numbers and writing down times. The mayor's office called for a meeting. The local paper ran follow-ups. The TV station did a full segment about consumer protection and how easy it was for a small cheat to become a big theft. Collins hired a lawyer who spoke like a man who read a lot of contracts and made his living telling other people not to panic. He sent a letter saying we were defamatory, that my video was misleading, that the inspection was a procedural error. He offered refunds to anyone who felt inconvenienced, and threatened to sue the reporter if the story kept running. He also announced on a flimsy Facebook post that he was installing new pumps, because optics matter. It looked, for a moment, like he might buy his way back to normal. People like him know how to move money faster than they can change minds. But what he didn't understand was this. You can paper over a single headline, but you can't buy the memory of 100 people who were shortchanged and then refused to shut up. You can't buy the person who filmed the canister test and uploaded it while his heart felt like it might explode. You can't buy the neighborhood that finally had the courage to say, enough. The county prosecutor announced a preliminary inquiry into multiple alleged violations at Collins stations. The Consumer Protection Agency issued fines and a demand for an audit of all pumps across the chain. The state weights and measures put a temporary hold on the station's license to operate until every meter was verified. Collins tried a different tack. He offered me a check, a large number, a settlement, if I'd remove the video and stop organizing. He sent his PR person to my house with flowers and an apology letter that smelled of lawyers. The man who had once mocked customers was suddenly very polished and very apologetic, as if a neat phrase could stitch the thing he'd been doing for months. I didn't take the check. I didn't accept the flowers. I told the PR guy, politely, calmly, that the people who mattered weren't going to be bought off. I told him I wanted a public apology, a verified refund program, and independent monitoring of their pumps for a year. He walked away with the note and the flowers and told me they'd consider it. He never intended to follow through. When Collins realized the legal and social pressure wouldn't fade, he escalated. Notices showed up at my apartment about trespassing, a thinly veiled attempt to make me look like an agitator. Someone posted my work schedule and my car's photo around the neighborhood. I slept poorly for a few nights. The sedan with tinted windows returned twice. The messages on social media turned nastier. Local trolls, likely paid or encouraged by someone with resources, tried to smear me, link me to other things, plant doubt. It was ugly and predictable. But two things kept me steady: the receipts and the people. Every time I felt the tide of intimidation, another email would come. Thanks for standing up. I just filed my complaint. Or someone would post video of the manager refusing to let an inspector see a logbook. The evidence kept arriving like a slow, unstoppable tide. The decisive moment came in court. The small claims suits we'd filed, dozens of them, became a consolidated case. The prosecutor added criminal charges for false measurement and consumer fraud after the state lab confirmed the pumps had been deliberately tampered with aftermarket devices to over-register volumes. It was worse than a sloppy calibration. It was deliberate. Watching Collins in the courtroom was something I won't forget. He sat in that chair with his suit tight around him, jaw clenched, eyes trying to look like he belonged there. His lawyer argued, as lawyers do, that intent was a high bar and that even honest mistakes happen. But the judge had the inspection reports, the lab results, the dozens of affidavits from customers, and a manager's internal email thread that had been leaked to the reporter. An email where Collins bragged about how much people don't pay attention to 2 gallons here and there. The paper ran that email the next day with the headline that would undo him: "Owner admits to shortchanging customers in internal memo." The town felt like a place where someone had turned on the lights and finally saw what was behind the curtains. The judge fined Collins heavily, ordered restitution to affected customers, and suspended the license of his worst-performing stations pending a full overhaul. The prosecutor announced criminal charges against 2 managers and a supplier who'd sold the tampering devices. Collins lost board memberships and local charity positions he'd used as PR. Sponsors distanced themselves. The business that had been a comfortable stream of nickels and dimes toward his lifestyle began to leak cash fast. It wasn't spectacular in the cinematic sense. There were no dramatic confessions on camera, no television-friendly "I was wrong" monologues. Most of the critical moves were forms and filings and signatures and figures and spreadsheets. But for the people who had been paying an extra $1 or $2 a week for months, the result was concrete: refunds, repairs, and a message that the community would not tolerate being taken. After the dust settled, there was one last meeting I wanted. I asked the reporter if he could arrange it. He smiled and said he thought Collins would agree, if only to stem the PR bloodletting. We met in a sterile conference room with a cup of coffee so weak it tasted like water. Collins looked tired. Older. He didn't sneer. He didn't accuse me of grandstanding. He offered the apology he'd never given publicly before cameras and witnesses. He paid the remainder of the restitution that the court had ordered. He signed an agreement for third-party audits. He agreed to fund a local program that taught drivers how to spot pump fraud and how to file complaints. It was a small thing, but it promised that this wouldn't just be a headline and then nothing. I listened. I asked for the manager who'd trained staff to install the tampering devices to be fired. I asked for a public statement about how the pumps would be replaced and monitored. Collins signed. The room smelled of coffee and the businesslike hush of people finishing a transaction. When I walked out, I felt strangely relieved. Not triumphant in the cartoonish sense of walking away with a paycheck. Relieved because I'd turned the thing that had been stolen from a lot of people into something that could be fixed. Months later, the pump at number 3 had a new faceplate and a plaque about consumer rights taped to the window. The petition was framed in the mayor's office. Some of the people who showed up on that first Saturday had started a small watchdog group that still met monthly. I'd gotten a few thank you dinners. A woman who used the station for her deliveries hugged me in the grocery aisle. Small things. There were costs. My name was smeared in corners of the internet. For a while, the stress cost me sleep and some friendships. People who kept their heads down didn't want to be near troublemakers. Collins never admitted that he was a bad man in a moral sense. He justified himself as someone doing what had to be done. Maybe he believed it. Maybe he didn't. He lost his easy comforts though, and that had to count for something. What I learned wasn't about winning or losing. It was about refusing to accept small thefts as part of life. It was about how quiet injustices stack up, how they become normal until someone points at them and says, "No," the revenge I wanted at first, the emotional slap to a man who humiliated my mom, the anger at every little cheat, mutated into something else. A push that made the community safer. I keep watching the road. I still stop at stations, but I mind the numbers now, not because I'm paranoid but because I know what neglect looks like when it's dressed up as business. When I drive past pump number 3, the lot looks cleaner, the price board honest, and sometimes a kid from the watchdog group waves. I wave back. Revenge isn't always breaking a man. Sometimes it's fixing what he broke. And sometimes that's enough.